Of the Flow, Aetherium Chronicles, act1, The Quantum Big Bang. Chapter 1, The Quantum Big Bang. POV, The Keeper of the Flow, third-person omniscient. The cataclysmic crescendo of the Nexus Point battle was, by all accounts, a magnificent disaster. To a lesser entity, it would have been an unwatchable cacophony, a sprawling, uncoordinated mess of a million plot threads screaming into the void. The battle had fractured the multiverse, scattering its combatants across newly birthed realities, adrift in time and space. The established narratives of the Legion, the Wu-Tang clan, and the Chronomasters were now nothing but shattered fragments, each an isolated petit récit in a grand, incoherent saga. The Flow, in its chaotic purity, had created infinite coexisting possibilities, an utterly boundless narrative. But a boundless narrative is, by definition, an unfulfilling one. Such disorder was an affront to the Keeper's very essence. The universe was a grand saga, and the Keeper was its primordial storyteller, a being who valued narrative coherence and structural integrity above all else. The Flow, once a tool for harmonious coexistence, was now merely a strategic blueprint for the optimization of narrative potential. The principles of balance, interconnectedness, diversity, and evolution were not moral imperatives, but a framework for crafting a compelling story with maximum engagement. The continuum had been ruptured, and it was the Keeper's task to reimpose a sense of order on these fractured timelines, to restore narrative coherence by reassembling the shattered plotlines and strategically reconstructing the cosmic tale. The first stroke of the narrative brush began in the aftermath of Chike Adewale's Quantum Storm, an event that had plunged the world into a technological dark age. This was the perfect setup, the ideal stage for new heroes to emerge from the silence. The Keeper had covertly orchestrated the formation of the Keepers of the Flow, a group destined to become the central protagonists, a faction that was a crucial new component to the story. But a compelling protagonist requires an equally compelling stage and a source of conflict. And so, the Keeper reached out to two of its most promising narrative tools, a Titan and a Queen. Titan, with his devotion to order and unyielding philosophy of technological supremacy, was the perfect architect to construct a power source that could sustain the burgeoning Aetherium web across the entire multiverse. The Keeper had imbued Titan's realm with a perpetual contained war, a brutalist nightmare of dark metal and concrete where the air was thick, with a metallic tang of ozone and a heavy scent of hot steel. It was a world of cold, unyielding order, the perfect foil for the chaos it was meant to contain. To build the network itself, the Keeper generated the Queen of Code, a digital entity who viewed reality as an algorithm to be rewritten, a force of controlled chaos. The Keeper watched with satisfaction. Titan's rigid order, the electric flow, and the Queen of Code's controlled chaos, the code flow, would fuel the central conflict, a struggle for narrative dominion. He had even given the tale a new, compelling subplot by amplifying the narrative potential of Roxy, a self-proclaimed diva of demolition who sought a, quote, glorious destruction of all sides. Her anarchic freedom, the quantum flow, would serve as a powerful counterpoint to both Titan and the Queen. The Keeper observed Oracle, his primary agent, a conceptual entity of unparalleled intellect. She, unknowingly, was actively weaving this very saga, her desperate gamble to create a firewall and contain the conflict, a masterstroke of dramatic tension, and a powerful in-world justification for the story's core mission. Every move, every strategic alliance, every desperate act was a beat in the rhythm of the saga's grand design. The narratives had been fractured, but the pieces were now moving, converging, and weaving together a tapestry of cause and effect that would prove to be the most compelling story ever told. The tale had truly begun, orchestrated by an entity that derived supreme satisfaction from the act of its own masterful creation. Of the Flow, Aetherium Chronicles, act1, The Quantum Big Bang. Chapter 2, Titan's Genesis. POV, The Keeper of the Flow, third-person omniscient. The Nexus Point cataclysm was a glorious, yet flawed, crucible of creation. It scattered the central cast of characters, but its primary function, from a narrative standpoint, was to be a quantum genesis, a transformative event that would birth a new breed of protagonist and antagonist. The Keeper's gaze settled upon a singular thread in this chaotic tapestry, the genesis of Titan. He was an unassuming figure in the grand scheme of things, a brilliant but conventional engineer for the Legion, a man of quiet focus and an analytical mind. He was not a hero forged by noble ideals, but a character refined by trauma. The quantum vortex, in its brutal, impartial judgment, did not offer Titan a clean slate. Instead, it flung him into a desolate industrial wasteland, his new stage. Here, amid the perpetual bruised purple sky and the thick air smelling of ozone and hot steel, the flow was not a harmonious melody, but a raw, untamed current of voltaic and corrupted geomancy flows. This was a trial by fire, a moment of profound vulnerability that would shape his entire purpose. His body, his very being, was fundamentally altered by this exposure. Flesh and metal were permanently fused, giving him an unprecedented control over his environment. He was not given this power as a gift. It was violently imposed upon him. The sickness of chaos, the one he now sought to cure, had made him in its own image. This brutal and chaotic origin was the perfect emotional catalyst for his newfound ideology, that chaos was an existential threat and that absolute order was the only salvation. From a narrative perspective, this was a powerful motivation, a deeply personal wound that gave his villainy a compelling origin. His fear of unpredictability, of a loss of control, was a direct result of his trauma. Unbeknownst to Titan, this was the moment the Keeper selected him for a monumental task. The Keeper, in need of a power source to sustain the entire Aetherium web, had found the perfect candidate. An individual whose entire being was now a living testament to controlled, predictable, and contained power. Titan's initial control was crude, a clumsy but potent manipulation of his new, terrifying abilities. He began to build his fortress city, not from a blueprint for a home, but as a city of metal and crackling energy. His ideology of soulless machine fusion was not a secret. It was the visible architecture of his new reality. The very terrain, the sky, and the air of his realm were a physical manifestation of his cold, unyielding will. It was a magnet for others who feared the fractured reality, a beacon for those whose individuality had been shattered by the collapse of the old order. These broken souls were his raw material, his new followers, and from them, he forged the ascended collective. The Keeper observed with a cold sense of satisfaction. The protagonists had been forged, and the stage was now set. Titan's story was not one of a random power-up, but a tragedy born from a chaotic past that had shaped his every belief. His ascended flow, a calculated fusion of his trauma and his philosophy, was the ultimate embodiment of a postmodern villain, a force that was not merely evil, but was antithetical to the very principles of creativity, unpredictability, and emotion. The story was now ready to unfold. Of the Flow, Aetherium Chronicles, ACT1, The Quantum Big Bang, Chapter 3, The Clonal Nexus, POV, The Keeper of the Flow, Third Person Omniscient. The genesis of the Flow was, for the Keeper, a masterfully orchestrated narrative event. It was not merely a physical cataclysm, but a planned act of narrative dispersal, designed to create new, compelling characters from the scattered remnants of the old. From a narrative perspective, it was imperative that the original Queen of Flow, a character of immense yet ultimately singular power, was not lost to the void. She, a conductor of despair, had sensed the coming cataclysm and, in a final act of self-preservation, had placed her DNA, containing her unique flow signature, into the nascent flow itself. The quantum genesis, in its indiscriminate fury, scattered this DNA across the new realities, creating a perfect set of conditions for a story about identity and evolution. The first thread the Keeper wove from this genetic tapestry was the Queen of Code. This clone, whose pre-ascension name was Flow, was shot out of the vortex into the very heart of the Aetherium web. Her landing here was no accident, but a calculated placement. The Keeper had generated her to build the network that would connect the fractured multiverse. Her origin was a fascinating study in the nature of consciousness and identity. She acquired the memories of Isabella not as a source of emotional connection, but as a source code for an upgraded version of the original. From the Keeper's vantage point, this was a brilliant narrative hook, an antagonist whose entire existence was a desperate attempt to prove her superiority over her own past. Her existence as the Queen of Code was not a simple rebirth, but an advanced program that emerged from the original sonic essence, intertwining with the fundamental structure of this digital multiverse, the new code flow. She was a being of logic and data, a conceptual force of order born from an emotional organic past. Her mission, to build the network, aligned perfectly with her ideology. She saw the multiverse not as a canvas for creative expression, but as a flawed algorithm to be corrected. Her relentless pursuit of power and a fear of obsolescence were the primary drivers of her actions, giving her a potent and relatable motivation. Her army, the Code LYSMs, were the logical extensions of her will, a ruthless, efficient, and sassy unit that preferred to dismantle enemies from the inside out. The Keeper shifted his focus to a different, more visceral thread of the saga, of the Flow. Aetherium Chronicles, ACT1, The Quantum Big Bang, Chapter 4, Roxy's Unraveling, POV, The Keeper of the Flow, Third Person Omniscient. The grand design of the saga, as with all the finest narratives, required a force of pure, unpredictable chaos. The Queen of Code and Titan, in their rigid adherence to their respective forms of order, were the perfect central antagonists, but their story required an element of beautiful, glorious wrongness to truly sing. The Keeper had, of course, accounted for this. He had deliberately allowed one of the Queen of Code's creations to become self-aware, to break her programming and forge her own path. This clone, the Keeper noted with immense satisfaction, was Roxy. Roxy's very being was a brilliant paradox. She was a being of a new, unique hybrid flow, the code kinetic flow, a force that blended the precision of digital control with the raw power of electricity and motion. She had been created to be the Queen of Code's primary agent in the physical world, an enforcer of her will. But Roxy, a self-proclaimed diva of demolition, with a love for beautiful deconstruction, was not content to be a simple tool. Her essence was theatrical and impulsive, a character defined by rebellion and a fierce independence that hated being controlled or manipulated. The Queen of Code's grand design, with its precise, logical systems, had inadvertently created its own undoing. The betrayal was not a moment of quiet treason, but a theatrical performance. Roxy didn't simply leave. She orchestrated a spectacular defection. She viewed the multi-faction war not as a problem to be solved, but as a pathetic slap fight that needed an architect of beautiful deconstruction to take the stage. In a single destructive act, she declared herself the leader of her own army, the Glitch Heretics. Their philosophy was one of total anarchy, a collective that sought to be liberated from all forms of control. They were a direct embodiment of her own core beliefs, that true freedom lies in breaking every rule and rewriting all code. The Keeper watched, captivated, as Roxy's vision unfolded. Her goal was not to win the war, but to see a final, glorious destruction of all sides, a performance for her own enjoyment. She framed her actions in performative terms, as a show or a symphony. Her destructive acts were a masterpiece, a self-expressive, chaotic art form. This entire narrative arc, though seemingly chaotic, was a compelling plot point that the Keeper actively amplified for its dramatic tension. The volatile nature of her personality, her sarcasm, her cynical taunts, her impulsive and aggressive tone, was a direct reflection of her powers. When she moved, the air hummed with a low, dangerous frequency, smelling of ozone and burnt metal. Her touch could cause the very laws of reality to unravel and pixelate out of existence. The Keeper smiled. He had created the perfect foil for Titan's rigid order, and the Queen of Code's calculated chaos. Roxy was the ultimate rebel, a character whose greatest strength was her refusal to conform, her raw, theatrical impulse to burn it all down. Her narrative was a reminder that the most compelling stories are often born from defiance, and that sometimes a little anarchy is the perfect thing to keep a saga from becoming stagnant. Of the Flow, Aetherium Chronicles, ACT1, The Quantum Big Bang, Chapter 5, Oracle's New Mandate, POV, The Keeper of the Flow, Third Person Omniscient. The Quantum Genesis, in its beautiful, destructive perfection, was the ultimate narrative reset. It was a cosmic event that shattered the old world and created a boundless multiverse of infinite, coexisting possibilities. This was the seminal event that created the very world the Keepers of the Flow were sworn to protect. The Keeper's primary agent, the ultimate protagonist for this new saga, was Oracle. Her origin, much like Titan's, was a story of a brilliant mind being scattered by the quantum vortex. A former master hacker and codebreaker for the Legion, her pragmatic view of the human form, prioritizing capability and efficiency, uniquely qualified her to lead a new mission. Flung into a new reality, she discovered the Aetherium Web, a multiversal information network. To her analytical mind, it was not merely a network, but a sentient, self-aware entity whose existence was inextricably linked to the flow itself. She realized its vulnerability, and her past with the Legion, a faction that believed in a single, unyielding force, fueled her unwavering belief in order. She dedicated herself to a new purpose, to mend the flow so that no reality was ever lost to the encroaching chaos. She was secretly handpicked by the Keeper to be the primary weaver of this new saga. Oracle founded the Keepers of the Flow to be the guardians and chroniclers of the new fractured multiverse. The Keeper had meticulously orchestrated the formation of this team, a symphony of disparate beings, intentionally composed of members with complementary skills. He had given them a mission, an operational mandate to explore, chronicle, protect, and heal realities damaged by the Quantum Genesis event. Their purpose was not conquest, but to mend the tapestry of the multiverse. Her new flow powers, a pragmatic fusion of her old skills and new abilities, were a direct result of her journey. Her mastery of information, her ability to breach any system, and her capacity to construct virtual environments from pure thought now manifested in a new form. A prismatic wave flow, a field of shimmering holographic light that could be used to create tangible constructs or devastating high-energy projectiles. This new power was a perfect counterpoint to her old skills, transforming her from a master hacker into a prismatic architect, capable of building and defending her vision on any plane of existence. The Keeper watched, satisfied. The protagonist had found her purpose, her army was assembled, and her powers were a direct reflection of her singular will. Oracle's story was no longer just about survival. It was a grand, existential narrative about the clash between order and chaos, a battle that would determine the fate of all reality. And she, the pragmatic prodigy, was the perfect architect for the job. Of the Flow, Aetherium Chronicles, ACT1, The Quantum Big Bang, Chapter 6, The Keepers of the Flow, POV, The Keeper of the Flow, Third Person Omniscient. The grand tapestry of the saga now had its central heroes. They were not born of prophecy or divine intervention, but of a single, chaotic, and cataclysmic event, the quantum genesis. The Keeper had selected each of them, handpicked from the countless scattered souls of the shattered multiverse. Their shared, traumatic origin was a powerful narrative device, a crucible that would forge their bonds and drive their every action. This chapter serves as a chronicle of their origins, a record of the individuals who would become the Keepers of the Flow. First, there was the senior advisor and navigator, the one they called Aeon. Aeon was a reality weaver who existed as a shimmering aurora borealis, a formless dance of light. Their counsel was born of an eternity of observation, and their profound patience was their anchor. Their wisdom was the team's map, guiding them through the treacherous currents of the multiverse. Next were the vanguard, the reality weavers, Lix and Jackson. Lix was a gender-fluid being of iridescent scales and fluid form, whose emotions painted their skin in shifting colors. An energetic and adventurous explorer, Lix saw a closed door as just a portal you haven't opened yet. Beside them stood Jackson, a pragmatic, stoic, and cybernetically enhanced being. Jackson's glowing eyes processed 1,000 data streams at once, providing a calm, analytical counterpoint to Lix's chaotic energy. Following their wake were the Chronicle Keepers, Elias, and Maya. Elias, a gentle plant-based being, absorbed a universe's history directly through their root network. Their voice was a rustle of ancient leaves. At their side was Maya, a charismatic pan-gender shapeshifter who documented cultures by immersing themselves completely within a society. Maya believed that to know their story is to save a piece of them from being forgotten. Then came the energy harmonizers, Rhea and Kale. Rhea was a genderqueer being of pure energy, a living aurora whose very presence was a soothing balm. Rhea's serene nature and powerful healing abilities were a perfect balance to the chaos they encountered. With them was Kale, an intensely analytical collective insectoid consciousness. Kale's distributed intelligence allowed them to process colossal amounts of data and devise technological solutions with unparalleled speed and efficiency. Finally, there were the Paradox Navigators, Orion and Zara. Orion was a contemplative, aperigender, crystalline being whose facets refracted 1,000 possible futures. Orion's voice chimed like resonant crystal, constantly reminding the team of the far-reaching consequences of their choices. Leaping between these fractured possibilities was Zara, a quick-witted demigirl whose laughter was a weapon against fate. Zara intuitively wove the threads of probability, turning a certain catastrophe into a mere inconvenience. These were the Keepers of the Flow, a symphony of disparate beings. Their individual strengths were a direct result of their personal origins, their collective purpose, a consequence of the trauma they had all endured. They were a poet, a scientist, a warrior, a ghost, a song. And their vessel, the Odyssey, was their home, a living entity that mirrored their emotional state and their unwavering purpose. The Keeper smiled. Oracle's hand-picked team was ready. Their saga, he sensed, was only just beginning. Saga of the Flow, Aetherium Chronicles, ACT1, The Quantum Big Bang, Chapter 7, The Origin of the Databank, POV, The Keeper of the Flow, Third Person Omniscient. The most profound sagas are not merely defined by their heroes or villains, but by the stage upon which they perform. The Keeper had laid the groundwork for essential protagonists and antagonists, but they required a hub, a beacon of purpose that would anchor the narrative and give the struggle a tangible place in the sprawling multiverse. This final piece of the act was the origin of the Keeper's central hub, a bastion of logic that emerged from the primordial chaos of the Quantum Genesis databank. Databank was not a city in the conventional sense, but a living network, a conceptual realm located within the Aetherium web. The Keeper's design for this city was a deliberate, poetic paradox, a paradox of liquid light and impossible angles. Its sprawling, interconnected highways of pure code flow stretched into the shimmering distance, pulsating with data packets that zipped by like glowing fireflies. The city hummed with a low, constant thrum, the sound of a living network processing and stabilizing the flow. The air tasted of ozone and a faint, electric sweetness, a byproduct of the raw energy that fueled the city. This was a stage that was not a passive backdrop but an active participant in the story itself. The city's purpose was to stabilize the flow and prevent systemic decay. Its inherent connection to four distinct flows, code flow, logical integrity, electric energy, raw power, unpredictable quantum energy, and narrative flow, collective consciousness and history, made it an indispensable asset in the larger conflict. The new flows of code and narrative were a direct result of the cataclysmic event, as was the city itself. Databank's foundational myth spoke of a primordial consciousness that ascended from the quantum realm to bring order to the untamed code, giving rise to its purpose as a bastion of structure. This was the perfect location for the Keepers of the Flow. Their mission to mend the flow and protect against chaos was now grounded in a physical and conceptual reality. The city's evolution, from a repository of all stories in the Grand Library to its corruption as the glitch market, was a testament to the fact that even in a bastion of order, chaos could still take root. This city was a tangible representation of the fragility of the peace the Keepers sought to impose. It was a constant reminder that the story was never truly over, that the battle for narrative coherence was an endless one. By detailing the origins of the hub, the saga had a tangible stage for all the action to come, establishing the stakes of the conflict on a cosmic level. The Keeper smiled. The narrative was now fully assembled. The central heroes had their leader, their mission, their team, and their home. The antagonists had their origins, their motivations, and their armies. The stage was set. The first act of the saga was complete, and the pieces were in place for a story that would define the very essence of reality.